Hello and welcome to this video all about learning more efficiently in the long term. Now, we've already talked about what you can do today or immediately as soon as you start learning some new concept to make that learning more efficient in a previous video, and you can find that video either somewhere on this page or somewhere in a link nearby to go over that if you haven't seen that video yet. Now, this video is more about the things that people generally don't want to do. And try not to take any of this personally. It's definitely not just you who will see all the things I'm about to say and say, I don't want to do that. Definitely feel like almost everybody has the natural inclination not to want to do any of these things, which is why it is so difficult for so many people to start doing them. Don't feel like you have to jump in with both feet and start doing all of these things to learn efficiently, because these are things that will make it easier for you to learn, but without doing any of them, it's still very possible for you to learn efficiently. So don't feel like I'm trying to say that just because you're not doing all of these things or even any of these things, you can't learn. I'm just trying to say that if you start to do all of these things or even any one of these things, it will be easier for you to learn. And the basic concept of all the things we're about to cover is that it will be easier for your brain to process new information, to create new connections, and to effectively consolidate those connections in long-term memory if you exercise, get enough sleep, and eat right. And ultimately, I know like saying those three things, like, oh, is that all? Just exercise, get enough sleep, and eat right? Sounds kind of like condescending almost. But we're going to talk about why those things actually help to make your brain work a little bit better. And then you can take it upon yourself to decide whether it's worth changing your lifestyle to have those effects. So to get started here, let's talk about probably the most effective of those three things, which is exercise. So exercise is really useful for your brain because it releases a neurotransmitter called BDNF. And BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and BDNF is basically the building block protein that your brain uses to repair itself. So I know that's a lot. In the last 20 seconds, we went from 0 to 100. So BDNF is basically something that your brain produces more of when you exercise, and when you have enough BDNF in your brain, then when you sleep, that BDNF is going to repair any damage to your brain. And it's not to say that your brain being damaged is like getting hit in the head, you know what I mean? But it's more like if you're learning something new and it's like an exercise for your brain, that's how your brain can repair itself. Just like people who exercise a lot and want to build muscle will take a protein supplement, BDNF is the protein in your brain that helps it to repair itself. And so that is the most important thing to note about BDNF, that it is the protein that your brain uses to repair itself. The same way that protein that we consume, that we eat, is used by our body to repair muscle. The protein that is released when we exercise, this BDNF in our brain, is used to repair our brain when we exercise our brain. Now, if you don't exercise at all, your brain is still going to produce BDNF. It's not like you won't have any protein. The same way that if you ate like a poor diet, you would still get some protein to repair your muscle. You're not going to die because you're not eating enough protein, but you'll probably still get some protein from somewhere. And so what's important to note is that people who exercise on a regular basis produce about 2 to 3 times as much BDNF, so they're able to repair their brain 2 to 3 times as effectively in theory. And I say in theory because it's difficult to prove the direct correlation between the brain repairing itself and the amount of BDNF. We know that BDNF is used for your brain to repair itself, and we know that there's more BDNF when you exercise. Those things have been clinically proven, but it's difficult to say that after some point, maybe BDNF is less effective. So maybe having 3 times as much BDNF is only twice as effective as having half as much BDNF. We don't really know that part of it, but we know that you'll have more BDNF in your brain if you exercise. So for that reason, if you were going to do one of these things, I think that exercising is definitely the most powerful one that you can do, because the next thing we're going to talk about, which is going to be sleep, is really only improved when that BDNF is present. So making sure that you get enough sleep is super important, because that's when your brain repairs itself. So if you, for instance, somehow physiologically were able to survive without sleep, your brain would never repair itself. So it would just keep getting like slightly more damaged and atrophied over time until you would be like less and less intelligent. So when you sleep, your brain repairs itself, it consolidates new information that you've learned. So that's what's really important. It's when you get that neural repair period. And again, it's super important to have that BDNF in your brain for your neural repair to happen. So for your brain to repair itself, you need to be asleep, and you need to have enough BDNF in your brain for it to work with, because the BDNF is kind of like the building block that it uses to repair your brain. So what is the correct amount of sleep, or how much sleep is most effective, is kind of the question that comes out of this. And what research has shown is that 7 to 9 hours is about 20 to 40% more effective for memory consolidation than having 6 hours or less. And that's the basic idea. So if you sleep 6 hours or less, your brain is going to have less time to repair itself, and you are less likely to be able to keep up with everything that you might want to learn. Now, if you're not like actively learning about anything, it might not make any difference. And what they've actually also found, which is really interesting, is that if you wanted to unlearn something, not getting enough sleep can actually be helpful. So they did this really interesting study where they would teach 2 people, I'll say, really 2 groups of people, the same task one time, and then the next day they would teach them to do the task in a completely different way. And what they found was, if they were teaching them the same process in one day, and then one of them sleeps for 8 hours and the other one sleeps for 6 hours, and then they're taught the exact same thing in a different way the next day, the group who slept for 6 hours has an easier time forgetting the way that they learned the day before and using the way that they're learning the next day. So I know that's kind of convoluted, but the basic idea is if you wanted to forget what you just learned, it would be easier if you didn't get enough sleep. So this group who only got 6 hours of sleep was having an easier time using the new method that they were taught the second day. And it's really interesting because that 8-hour sleeper is more likely to accidentally do things the way they were taught on the first day, which I just thought this was a really interesting study. And it kind of just goes to show that just getting enough sleep is enough for your brain to retain some of that information, whether you really intentionally want to or not. So it's actually harder for you to forget what you just learned just because you had enough sleep, is what this study has kind of shown. So that's enough about sleep, but now let's talk about the kind of really terrible one that nobody wants to do, which is changing your diet. Now, overall, diet is playing a big difference in the way that your brain works because of nitrates, glucose, and DHA regulation. And we'll talk a little bit more about what each of those things means. Now, for the most part, everybody does get all of these things in their diet, but it's not even about getting more of them. It's really about regulating how much of them and the sources where we actually get these things from, especially glucose, because having too much glucose go into your bloodstream too fast is something that can make your brain work less effectively, and in a long-term way, it can actually cause diabetes. That's kind of what causes diabetes, having too much glucose get into your bloodstream too fast, and having that happen too often is kind of something that will make insulin regulation difficult for your body to manage. But we're not here to talk about diabetes. We're here to talk about how these things affect your ability to learn. Now, ultimately, what would be best is for you to have a steady supply of nitrates, glucose, and DHA by eating foods that are digested a little bit more slowly, that contain all of these things. And unfortunately, the best sources of these things, as you may have already been guessing, are cruciferous vegetables or green leafy vegetables, because green leafy vegetables contain complex carbohydrates and it's harder for your stomach to kind of break them down. So they break down more slowly and release all of these things into your bloodstream more slowly and consistently throughout the day. Now we also have things like seeds, nuts, and berries that are broken down a little more slowly and consistently. So it's not all about leafy greens. There are some other things that we can eat. But ultimately, if you were just trying to think of one specific idea behind the right foods to eat, it's going to be leafy greens. So I'll even say leafy greens again, just to drive home that idea that eating leafy greens is going to be better for your mental health because it's going to steadily release all of those things. So something like eating raw broccoli every day would have a huge impact on your ability to consistently think throughout the day. So if you ate like raw broccoli for breakfast, you would probably see that midday slump is gone or at least like minimized, because what happens is that complex carbohydrate, as it breaks down, kind of slowly gives you energy throughout the day, as compared to something like a sugary cereal, which gives you a boost of energy right away, but that slowly tapers off, and then there's nothing left in your stomach to digest to give you new energy by lunchtime. Which kind of leads us right into what is kind of bad for you to eat, which is high glycemic load food, saturated fat, and alcohol. So high glycemic load food would be stuff like candy or something that is very sugary or full of processed sugar or just heavily processed in general. Even white bread has been shown to be something with a really high glycemic load that can mentally impair you pretty quickly. But the number one example that always pops into my head, because it kind of fits both of those things, it's kind of like a combination between candy and white bread, and it's absolutely delicious, and I'm not telling you not to ever eat it, I'm just saying that you should be careful about it, is donuts. So everybody loves donuts, at least I feel like everybody loves donuts. Donuts are delicious, but they are terrible for you, and they are terrible for your mental health. And we all know this, and we eat them anyway. So I'm not telling you don't eat donuts. I eat donuts. I love donuts. So I can't tell you that you shouldn't eat them, but I can tell you that it's bad for you, and it will negatively impact your ability to think clearly, which is kind of interesting. You may not notice this, and it's not like such a strong effect right away, but over time, if you eat a lot of high glycemic load foods like donuts, you'll start to notice that it is very difficult to think straight a lot of the time. And you may be feeling that way right now, and I'm not telling you that you should never eat donuts, but I'm telling you that they definitely play a part in that kind of brain fog that a lot of people carry around with us. So highly processed foods are definitely our number one enemy here for our brain, especially things like white flour and processed sugar. So highly processed foods are definitely our number one enemy, especially white flour and processed sugar, both of which are present in white bread and donuts, which is what makes them so specifically notable here. But a lot of things actually contain bleached white flour and processed sugar that most of us eat every day and don't even think about. So again, I'm not telling you never to eat these things. I'm just saying that when you do eat them, it does have a negative impact on your brain, and this is how. It releases glucose into your bloodstream too fast. And when that happens, your brain kind of gets shocked, and it's a little bit difficult for your brain to think straight when it's been shocked like this. And this is what we kind of see in children as like a sugar rush, but it's not even that. It's giving kids extra energy, which is something that studies have shown, but it's It's just making them unable to think straight, and they still have the energy that they've always had. So that's one thing to definitely consider. White flour and processed sugar are definitely our top two that most people in the United States eat all the time. That's probably a little bit dangerous for us if we're trying to learn. And what's really unfortunate is the next two items on our list, which are what people will try to eat instead of processed sugar, which are usually stuff like aspartame and sucralose, but generally just any fake sugar. And there have actually been multiple studies at this point that show that both aspartame and sucralose have a negative effect on your ability to encode memory, to learn, to think straight, and to make good decisions. So your ability to make decisions will actually be impaired by eating those two things. And that's what makes it really unfortunate, because between processed sugar, aspartame, and sucralose, it's kind of like, what am I supposed to eat if I want something sweet? And again, the unfortunate answer here, for some of us anyway, is fruit. So fruit is unprocessed sugar, and it's real sugar. It's not sucralose or aspartame, and it will be digested a little bit more slowly than processed white sugar. So that is kind of what I try to use as an outlet anytime that I can, but I still definitely, a lot of the time, am like, you know what, forget it, I'm just gonna have a donut. So I definitely don't blame you if you want to eat these things. I'm not telling you that you should never eat these things. I'm just telling you that they do have a proven negative effect on your ability to learn and encode memory. Now, the next one we're going to talk about, I think a lot of you probably already knew, which is going to be alcohol. Now, alcohol literally in your brain has the effect of breaking connections between neurons and causing what is physiologically known as clinical depression. And I'm not going to get too deep into the emotional impact of that statement, but that's why alcohol is called a depressant, because it clinically causes depression in your brain by breaking the connections between neurons. And when it breaks those connections, when it depresses your brain's ability to connect neurons to each other, it makes it a lot more difficult for you to learn new things or to even retain things you already knew. So alcohol can actually cause you to forget things that you knew previously, and we all know this. I'm sure that a lot of you have, had a night where you drank too much alcohol and you don't really remember what happened. So it's kind of easy to prove, if you really think about it, just to yourself through anecdotal evidence, that alcohol has a negative impact on memory. So a lot of us knew this already, but it's important to know that it also has a long-term negative effect on memory and even on mental health by breaking those connections between neurons. All right, and so with all of that said, I think that you guys have learned a lot here about how exercise, diet, and sleep all affect your ability to learn and your cognitive functionality. So I hope that you can take some of this information and use it to kind of improve your lifestyle. But again, if you don't, it's not a slight to me. I'm not trying to personally attack you, and I want to make sure that you know that I'm just sharing this information. This isn't my opinion. These are scientifically proven facts, and you can find the references for all of these things on my website under the article. You may be watching this video from that article, and if not, you will see a link to that article in the description of this video. So I just wanted to share all of this information to my students and to anybody else who is interested in improving their memory and their ability to learn. But again, this is not, I'm not trying to personally single anybody out. I love to eat things that are sweet, like cake and donuts. I don't really very much enjoy eating vegetables, just like anybody else. And nobody really likes to exercise that much. And I know it is very difficult for any of us to get enough sleep. I know that's something that I personally still struggle a lot with. I probably got like 6.5 hours of sleep last night even. So I'm not trying to criticize any of you for not doing these things. I just want you to have this information so that if you wanted to improve your memory or your ability to learn, that you would have the tools you need to kind of decide what to do about that. So with all of that said, thank you for watching, and I hope that you did find some of this stuff useful.